Picture this. It's the middle of the night, October 31st, somewhere in the Celtic lands of ancient Ireland. The year is slipping from light into darkness, not just the seasons, but reality itself. The boundary between the world of the living and something else, something ancient and terrifying, is dissolving. For one night only, the rules of the universe are suspended. The dead are walking. The spirits are crossing. And the people are watching, waiting, afraid. Now jump forward 2,000 years. It's October 31st again. The night is the same, but everything else has changed. Instead of bonfires and fearful whispers, you see children in plastic masks running door to door screaming trick or treat. Their pockets overflow with mass-produced candy wrappers. The streets glow with carved pumpkins wearing goofy grins. Nobody's thinking about spiritual gateways or communion with the dead. They're thinking about getting a full-size Snickers bar. This is the most dramatic transformation of any ancient festival on Earth. And the story of how it happened is far stranger, far darker, and far more revealing than you might expect. This is the tale of Samhain, and everything that's happened to it since. To understand Samhain, you have to step into a world that doesn't exist anymore. A world so different from ours that its fundamental logic is almost unrecognizable. The ancient Gaelic peoples who lived in Ireland and Scotland, this was between roughly the 5th century BC and the medieval period, they didn't see reality the way we do. For us, the world is what we can touch, see, and measure. Everything else is imagination. But for them, the world had two faces, and both were equally real. There was the world of the living, the fields, the forests, the homes where people worked and fought and loved and died. This was the world of seasons, of birth and death, of time marching forward. But hidden just beyond the reach of normal human senses, woven into the very earth beneath their feet, was another world entirely. The ancient texts call it the side, pronounced she. This wasn't some distant heaven or hell. It was right here, right beside us, existing in the same space but on a different plane of reality. The side was described as a land of eternal youth, of impossible beauty, where time moved differently or didn't move at all. It was home to the Teesir, beings of immense power and utterly alien morality. These creatures were the old gods, the ancestors, the fairy folk, all fused into a single category. They weren't evil, but they operated by rules no human could fully understand. They were as unpredictable as nature itself, as merciful as summer rain or as cruel as a sudden frost that destroys the entire harvest. For most of the year, there was a boundary between these worlds. It was like an invisible wall, firm and fixed. Mortals lived on one side, the side on the other. The two worlds had their own laws, their own logic, their own purposes. You didn't cross that line, and it didn't cross into you. But everything changed on one specific night. The night when the boundary became thin, porous, almost transparent. The night when the rules of reality itself seemed to break down. This was called Samhain. Samhain happened at the exact turning point of the year. It marked the moment when autumn tipped into winter, when the warmth and light of summer finally gave way to the cold and darkness of the growing season. But Samhain wasn't actually part of either season. It existed in the gap between them, a night that belonged to neither summer nor winter, a moment that stood outside the normal flow of time. It occurred on what we now call October 31st or November 1st, though the ancient Celts marked their calendar differently, by the seasons rather than by months. What mattered was that Samhain coincided with something very practical and very real. It was the moment when the livestock were brought down from the summer mountain pastures. It was when the final crops were harvested. Winter was coming, and it was coming fast. But on this particular night, something more than just seasonal change was supposed to happen. The medieval Irish texts are almost obsessively clear about this. On Samhain night, the boundary between worlds didn't just grow thin, it virtually ceased to exist. The fairy mounds, the hidden doorways to the side, were believed to swing open. A strange, otherworldly light was said to pour out into the darkened land. The beings that lived in that other reality could now step through into the world of mortals. They could walk on the earth. They could interact with humans. And they could take things, livestock, people, souls. This wasn't something to celebrate. This was something to survive. The medieval Irish text called The Adventure of Nera paints the picture with raw, stark horror. It describes Samhain night like this: great was the darkness of that night, and demons would appear on that night always. The word demons is a later Christian interpretation, a way of trying to make sense of something that predated Christianity by centuries. But the feeling encoded in that phrase, profound supernatural dread, that was pure, ancient, genuine. What made it worse, what made it truly terrifying, was that the people of ancient Ireland actually believed this. They weren't telling scary stories to amuse themselves. They weren't doing this for fun or excitement. This was metaphysical reality as they understood it. On this night, the barriers came down. On this night, anything could happen. But Samhain wasn't just about terror. Yes, the spiritual dangers were real and overwhelming. But the people also understood that with that danger came opportunity. When the veil grew thin, when the boundaries between worlds dissolved, something else became possible. Power. Knowledge. The ability to reach across into a realm that was normally beyond human touch. This is why Samhain became one of the most sacred nights in the entire Gaelic calendar. It was a time of profound spiritual peril, but also of profound spiritual potential. A time when the future could be glimpsed. When the dead could be honored. When someone with the right knowledge and the right intentions could actually reach into the world of the side and bring back wisdom, blessings, or even objects of power. One of the most famous sacred sites in all of Ireland was a place called Tara, the seat of the High Kings. And at Tara stands an ancient mound that still exists today, over 5,000 years old, called the Mound of Hostages. Archaeologists have discovered something remarkable about this structure. The internal passage is precisely aligned so that on the morning of Samhain, the first moment of sunrise on that day, a beam of light penetrates deep into the chamber. The chamber where hundreds of ancient people were cremated and buried. Now, scholars debate whether this alignment was intentional or coincidence. But whether it was planned or not, the effect is profound. The light of the new season entering the house of the ancient dead. A symbolic reunion of the living and the long departed. This same pattern, this same sacred idea, shows up across dozens of other ancient monuments. It wasn't random. It was core to how ancient people understood time, death, and spiritual power. This made Samhain absolutely central to the spiritual and political life of Gaelic society. But here's something most people don't realize. Samhain wasn't primarily a night of supernatural terror. It was also, and perhaps more importantly, a night of human power and human order. From the perspective of the Gaelic kingdoms, Samhain was the most important night of the year for an entirely different reason. It was the time when society literally gathered itself together. It was the hinge upon which the entire social order turned. The practical reason was simple but significant. By late October, the pastoral year was ending. The cattle were back from the highlands. The crops were in. The surplus grain had been converted into beer and mead. And here's the grim part, not all the livestock could survive the winter. So the great slaughter took place. Fresh meat was suddenly abundant, more abundant than it would be for months. This meant one thing: now was the time for the great feast, the great assembly, the gathering of clans. These weren't casual social events. These were the supreme political moment of the year. The ancient Irish legal texts describe these gatherings in detail. They were called the Línag, grand assemblies where the entire social, political, and religious life of a kingdom was put on display and reinforced. The medieval Irish sagas paint a vivid picture. In one famous tale, a king named Concobar hosts a Samhain feast at his royal seat. The text boasts that he provided 100 vats of every kind of ale. This wasn't hyperbole. This was a demonstration of royal power and generosity. Through enormous expenditure and careful distribution of wealth, a king proved his right to rule. His warriors renewed their loyalty. His subjects were reminded of their place in the hierarchy. According to the texts, these assemblies lasted an entire week, 3 days before Samhain, the day itself, and 3 days after. A full week of ceremonies, legal proceedings, games, competitions, and feasting. This was when the laws of the realm were proclaimed. This was when disputes were settled. This was when tributes were paid and obligations renewed. But there was also something darker happening. According to some sources, peace was often declared on Samhain. All feuds, all raids, all legal disputes were supposed to be set aside. Why? Not out of kindness, but out of fear. Fear of what might happen if the community was fractured and divided on the one night when the boundary between worlds was weakest. If internal conflict was tearing apart your community precisely when the dangerous forces from the side were able to cross into the mortal world, well, that was inviting catastrophe. But Samhain wasn't just for kings and chieftains. It was also deeply, intimately personal. Behind closed doors, in the homes of ordinary people, very different kinds of magic were taking place. The most sacred of these was something called the Dumb Supper. And it's almost exactly as strange as it sounds. On Samhain night, a family would gather for their meal. But the meal had an empty chair. That chair was set with the best food, the finest drink. And that seat was for the dead. For the ancestors. The family would eat in complete silence, listening carefully for any sound, a creak of the floorboards, a whisper of wind, anything that might indicate the arrival of their departed relatives. They believed that on this night, the spirits of their dead, drawn by family bonds and memory, would actually return to sit at the table. The family was extending hospitality across the veil of death itself. This was an act of profound love and respect, a way of affirming that family didn't end with death. The chain of kinship stretched back through time, and on this one night, the chain could be felt and honored. But outside the safety of the home, the night was dangerous. Not all the spirits walking the earth were beloved ancestors. There were trickster spirits, capricious fairies, lonely ghosts, and far worse things. To travel on Samhain night was to risk an encounter from which you might never return. So people used disguise. This is where the masks and costumes come in. Young people, often young men, would dress themselves in costumes made of straw, animal hides, or carved wooden masks. Sometimes they would deliberately cross-dress, men appearing as women and women as men. It was a kind of spiritual camouflage. If you looked like a spirit or a creature of the other world, the theory went, maybe you could move through the night undetected. Maybe the wandering spirits would see you as one of their own and leave you alone. But these weren't just protective disguises. They were also performance. These groups of geisers or mummers would travel from house to house, often making a noisy, raucous procession. At each door, they would offer something, a song, a poem, a piece of music, a theatrical performance. In exchange, they would be given an offering of food or drink. This was called souling in later Christian times. It was a tradition where the people moving through the night weren't hiding from the spiritual world, they were actively engaging with it, on the condition that they offered something of value in return. It was a transaction, a negotiation. But it was also a way of binding the community together, a night of licensed chaos where the normal social order was temporarily suspended. Then there was the divination. When the veil grew thin, certain people claimed they could see through it. Could glimpse the future. And Samhain was the night when this was most possible. Young people, particularly the unmarried, were obsessed with one question: who would they marry? The traditions were elaborate. Apples were floated in water, and the first person to snatch one with their teeth would be the first to marry. A young woman would peel an apple in one long, continuous strip, then swing it around her head and let it fall. Whatever shape the peel made on the floor was said to form the initial of her future husband. Hazelnuts were placed on the fire, the symbol of wisdom. If two nuts burned steadily together, it meant a happy union. If they hissed and spat and jumped apart, it meant conflict. These games were more than just entertainment. They were people trying to gain some certainty about the most important decision of their lives at precisely the moment when they believed such knowledge might be possible. When the barriers between worlds were down and the future could be glimpsed. And then, to protect the home from any malevolent force that might slip through the thinned veil, people carved faces into vegetables. Turnips, mostly, since that's what was available in Ireland and Scotland. They carved grotesque, demonic faces into them, placed a burning coal or candle inside, and set them in windows and doorways. The bright, threatening face was meant to scare away any evil spirits that might try to enter the home. This is the original jack-o'-lantern. Not a cute, grinning orange pumpkin. A grim, demonic turnip face with a terrifying expression. Pure apotropaic magic, magic designed to frighten evil away by showing it something equally frightening. For centuries, Samhain existed as the anchor point of Gaelic society and spirituality. But everything changed when a new faith arrived on the islands. Christianity came to Ireland not with conquest and armies, at least not initially, but with missionaries and monks carrying manuscripts. It was a slow, complicated process. But by the medieval period, Christianity was deeply woven into Irish and Scottish culture. The crucial thing to understand is that the Christian Church didn't simply erase Samhain. That would have been impossible. The roots were too deep. The people were too attached to it. Instead, something far more interesting happened. A process that scholars call syncretism, a blending of old and new, where the forms stayed recognizable but the meaning changed. The first major shift was in the calendar. In the year 835, Pope Gregory IV made a decision that would reshape the festival forever. He officially designated November 1st as All Saints' Day, a day to honor every saint and martyr who had died for the faith. Now, this decree wasn't explicitly designed to suppress Samhain. But its effect was staggering. It placed one of the most important holidays of the Christian calendar directly on top of the most important sacred day of the Gaelic calendar. And then, layered on top of that, came November 2nd, designated as All Souls' Day, a day of prayer for the souls of the dead, believed to be in purgatory. Suddenly, there was a new theological framework for the season. The 3 days of October 31st to November 2nd became known as All Hallow-Tide. The eve of All Saints' Day, October 31st, became All Hallows' Eve. Over centuries, this would be slurred and shortened into the single word we know today, Halloween. For the Church, this was now a time of prayer vigils and solemn remembrance of Christian dead. But the people? They didn't abandon their old customs. Instead, they repurposed them. They filled the old forms with new Christian meaning. The bonfires didn't disappear. They were reconsecrated as Cowlowmass fires, their protective light now interpreted as a way to honor the saints or guide Christian souls on their journey to the afterlife. The tradition of guising and souling persisted but took on new meaning. Instead of disguised spirits negotiating with the supernatural world, you had people, children and the poor, traveling door to door singing prayers for the dead in exchange for soul cakes, small spiced cakes often marked with a cross. For centuries, this hybrid festival coexisted. A strange blend of ancient pagan practice and Christian doctrine. It worked because the core emotional experience remained the same, honoring the dead, confronting the boundary between life and death, gathering as a community in the face of the encroaching winter darkness. But this fragile peace was shattered in the 16th and 17th centuries when the Protestant Reformation swept across Europe. The new Protestant authorities, particularly in Scotland, looked at this blend of Christian and pagan practice with absolute horror. To them, this wasn't a harmless accommodation. It was a grave theological error. The lingering customs of Samhain, the bonfires, the divination games, the masquerades, these weren't cute folk traditions. They were the unambiguous works of the devil. Papist superstitions. Idolatrous rituals that the Catholic Church had sinfully allowed to fester. What followed was systematic suppression. Stern Protestant ministers and religious zealots enacted official bans. Village bonfires were ordered extinguished. The old fortune-telling games were condemned as witchcraft, and remember, saying something was witchcraft in the 16th and 17th centuries often had deadly consequences. In the eyes of the reformers, Samhain night was no longer a time when the veil to the other world grew thin. It was a time when the gates of hell itself swung wide open. These official suppressions were devastatingly effective. The public communal celebration of Samhain was largely erased from the official life of many communities. The festival was driven underground. It survived only in remote glens and isolated islands, practiced quietly and in defiance of the religious authorities. The soul of Samhain went into hiding, waiting for a moment when it could re-emerge. That moment never came in the old country. Instead, it came on the other side of an ocean. The 19th century brought catastrophe to Ireland. The Great Famine, lasting from 1845 to 1852, was an unimaginable horror. A perfect storm of potato blight, mass starvation, and brutal colonial policy that killed over 1 million people and forced another million to flee. These weren't just people looking for better economic opportunities. These were desperate refugees, carrying everything they could. Including their ghosts. Including their traditions. Including the fragmented but deeply ingrained customs of Samhain. Irish immigrants, and to a lesser extent Scottish immigrants, poured into North American cities. Boston, New York, Montreal. They crowded into narrow tenement streets, creating tight-knit communities where the language, the music, and the customs of the old country could be kept alive. In these immigrant neighborhoods, Samhain found new life. It was no longer a grand public spiritual event supervised by chieftains and priests. It became a small domestic celebration. A way to remember home. A way to create continuity and meaning in a bewildering new world. But something had to change, because North America wasn't Ireland. And the most iconic symbol of the festival underwent the most significant transformation. For centuries in Ireland and Scotland, the carved vegetable lantern had been made from a turnip. A pale, hard vegetable that was difficult to carve but available in the Celtic lands. But in North America, turnips weren't a common crop. What was abundant, what was native to the soil, what was inextricably linked with the American harvest was a large, round, vibrant orange gourd. The pumpkin. It was bigger. It was softer. It was infinitely easier to carve. By a simple accident of agriculture and convenience, the American jack-o'-lantern was born. But this was more than just a vegetable substitution. It was a profound symbolic shift. The American pumpkin lantern, with its bright cheerful color and its often comical, grinning face, was a world away from its grim and grotesque European ancestor. It was a symbol of the New World's bounty, of American optimism, of the festival's slow transformation from a solemn night of spiritual dread into something playful and family-friendly. The first known printed image of a carved pumpkin in this new role appeared in an 1867 edition of Harper's Weekly, a woodcut showing children gleefully carrying a lit pumpkin. It was a declaration. The haunted turnip of the old world was dead. Long live the American pumpkin. At the same time, the old traditions were also shifting. The solemn act of souling and the raucous performative tradition of guising were merging and simplifying. The complex spiritual negotiation was flattening into something far more straightforward. A simple transaction. You perform, I give you food. The overture of spiritual protection and communal obligation was giving way to pure, simple begging. This evolution found its ultimate expression in a phrase that would become the defining image of the holiday. The first recorded instances of the words trick or treat began appearing in Canadian newspapers in the late 1910s and in the United States by the 1930s. This new phrase perfectly captured the holiday's changing spirit. The ancient threat of the otherworld had been domesticated into a mischievous childish trick. The sacred offering to a wandering spirit had become a treat. The deep spiritual grammar of the old festival was being forgotten. Replaced by a simple, catchy slogan that was perfectly suited to a new century and a new world. The soul of Samhain had survived the journey across the Atlantic. But in the process, it had begun to forget its own name. As the 20th century unfolded, Halloween's transformation from a half-remembered immigrant folk custom into a full-fledged American cultural institution accelerated rapidly. The mischievous energy that had once been the domain of guising adults was transferred to the nation's children. But this wasn't a gentle or benign transition. Young people's tricks often became a genuine civic problem. Vandalism. Petty crime. Fences torn down. Windows soaked. Outhouses tipped over. In response, communities across the country, particularly in the Midwest, developed a uniquely American solution: organized fun. Public Halloween festivities, parades, costume contests, town parties. The goal was clear. Channel the chaotic energy of the youth into supervised, family-friendly events. This was the first step in taming the holiday. In stripping it of its last vestiges of wild, unpredictable spirit and repackaging it as a safe, wholesome civic celebration. But the real catalyst for the creation of modern Halloween came after World War II. The post-war economic boom, the rise of the suburbs, the creation of a powerful new consumer class, these forces created perfect conditions for the holiday to be not just celebrated but industrialized. The ritual of trick-or-treating exploded in popularity in the 1950s, becoming a rite of passage for the children of the baby boom. And where children went, corporate marketers were sure to follow. Candy companies that had previously focused on Christmas and Easter suddenly saw a massive untapped market. They began producing smaller, individually wrapped candies and launched aggressive advertising campaigns explicitly linking their products to the joy of trick-or-treating. Ads in magazines and on the new powerful medium of television showed beaming children receiving handfuls of brand-name chocolates and sweets. The old offering of a soul cake, a piece of fruit, or a handful of nuts was systematically replaced by a new expectation of mass-produced, commercially branded candy. This process of commercialization was dramatically accelerated in the 1960s and 70s by something entirely unexpected, an urban legend that was almost completely false. A wave of panic swept across the country, amplified by sensationalist media reports centered on a terrifying idea. Malevolent strangers were poisoning Halloween candy, or hiding razor blades and needles inside apples. Children would come home from trick-or-treating and bite into an apple filled with glass, or eat a chocolate-covered treat laced with toxins. This fear tapped into growing anxiety about the safety of an increasingly anonymous suburban world. And it had a profound and immediate effect on the holiday. Homemade treats, once a cherished part of the tradition, were now viewed with deep suspicion. The only safe candy was one that came from a factory, sealed in its own tamper-proof wrapper. Here's the thing though. According to the sociologist Joel Best, who has spent decades studying this phenomenon, the panic was based on almost no evidence whatsoever. He found no credible reports of a single child being killed or seriously injured by a contaminated trick-or-treat candy. The few documented cases of poisoned candy were invariably committed by a family member trying to cover up a domestic crime, not by some faceless monster in the neighborhood. Yet the myth was more powerful than the reality. And it had a specific, devastating effect. It created a powerful social mandate for store-bought, factory-sealed products. In one stroke, it turned candy manufacturers into the undisputed gatekeepers of the new Halloween tradition. It institutionalized commercialization. It made corporate products not just preferable, but psychologically necessary for any parent who cared about their child's safety. The poisoned candy panic, an urban legend that was almost entirely baseless, effectively completed the industrialization of Halloween. By the end of the 20th century, the transformation was total. Halloween had become a multi-billion-dollar industry. Its landscape was no longer the misty hills of ancient Ireland. It was the brightly lit aisles of the seasonal superstore. Its rituals were no longer the sacred lighting of a bonfire or the solemn honoring of the dead. They were the purchase of a plastic costume and a bulk bag of miniature candy bars. The deep, resonant spiritual questions about life, death, and the existence of another world had been replaced by a much simpler question: what are you going to be for Halloween? The ancient festival that had once confronted the very real terror of encroaching darkness had been remade in America's image. A bright, loud, and profoundly commercial celebration of fantasy, spectacle, and consumption. The old gods were not just forgotten. They had been replaced by the new gods of the marketplace. The story could have ended here, in the bright, noisy, profitable landscape of the American 20th century. The ancient spirit of Samhain could have been fully and finally exorcised. Its last ghost lay to rest under a mountain of candy wrappers and plastic masks. But there was a rebellion stirring. And it was quietly beginning to reclaim what had been lost. Beginning in the latter half of the 20th century, a powerful new spiritual movement began to emerge into public consciousness. This was modern paganism, a diverse collection of traditions like Wiccan and Celtic Reconstructionism, which sought to revive and reimagine the pre-Christian religions of Europe. For these practitioners, Samhain wasn't a historical curiosity. It was a living and vitally important sacred day. They looked past the commercial Halloween back to the old texts and folklore and began the work of spiritual reconstruction. They adopted Samhain as one of the great Sabbaths in their modern wheel of the year. They celebrated it as the Celtic New Year, a time that marked both the final harvest and the sacred moment of death and rebirth. In clearings in the woods and in suburban living rooms, new covens and circles gathered. They built ancestor altars adorned with photographs of their beloved dead, with skulls and autumn leaves. They left offerings of bread and wine. They revived the ancient practice of the dumb supper, sharing a silent meal with the spirits of their kin. They practiced divination, using tarot cards and scrying mirrors to peer through the thin veil into the coming year. Their work was not a perfect, unbroken continuation of the ancient ways. It was a modern act of spiritual archaeology, a conscious and heartfelt effort to reclaim the fragments of a lost world and piece them back together into a faith that could speak to the needs of a modern soul. At the same time, another kind of revival was taking place back in the old country. In Ireland and Scotland, a renewed pride in Gaelic heritage began to flourish. The ancient festival was now seen not just as a religious rite, but as a vital piece of national culture. Grand public celebrations emerged. Most famously, the Samhain Fire Festival in Edinburgh. On a cold autumn night, thousands gather on Calton Hill to watch a spectacular modern reenactment of the ancient drama. Great processions of drummers and torchbearers, costumed as the courts of summer and winter, engage in a ritual battle that culminates in the lighting of a massive bonfire. This isn't ancient pagan worship. It's modern public art. But it's a powerful and popular celebration of a shared and unique cultural inheritance. And so we return to our original question. What became of the ancient soul of Samhain? The answer is complicated. It didn't die. It fractured. Today, two festivals exist side by side on the same night. There is the one we all know, the bright and noisy ghost of the original. A creature of pop culture and commerce. A night of harmless fun that asks nothing of us but our participation in its spectacle. Children in plastic masks. Supermarket aisles overflowing with candy. Corporate decorations and mass-produced costumes. But just beneath it, the ancient heart still beats. It beats in the quiet reverence of a pagan circle honoring their dead. It beats in the thunderous drums of a fire festival in the hills of Scotland. It beats in the simple private act of lighting a candle for a loved one who has passed. It beats in those who still understand that this night marks something sacred, a thin place where the boundary between worlds grows permeable, where the past reaches toward the present, where we can honor those who came before us. The true soul of Samhain is not found in a costume or a piece of candy. It's found in the timeless and necessary human need to confront the darkness, both in the world and in ourselves. It's the need to feel the presence of those who came before us. The need to honor the great chain of which we are all a part. And it's the need to gather together as a community, to share our light, and to find the warmth and strength to face the coming winter. The forms may change. The names may be forgotten. But that ancient, fundamental human impulse remains. The soul of the festival is not lost. It lives on, waiting in the gathering dark for anyone who chooses to remember and to relight the ancient fires.